Imagine a forest at the absolute edge of night, a place where time seems to hold its breath. Millions of years ago, this kind of silence was not a sign of peace. It was a terrifying biological signal. For a primate living in the brush, total silence meant that every bird, every insect, every living thing had suddenly frozen. It meant that something large, something hungry, was moving through the shadows. In that ancient world, noise was the ultimate indicator of safety. The rhythmic crackle of a campfire, the distant, muffled chatter of the tribe, the constant, chaotic drone of cicadas. These were the background tracks of survival. They were the constant updates, the status reports telling the brain that the world was still turning and that one was not alone. Now, fast forward to the present day. We have built a world that is obsessed with the concept of quiet. We spend small fortunes on noise-canceling headphones to erase the city. We design minimalist living spaces with smooth, sterile walls and high ceilings. We are taught from a young age that peace is found in the total absence of sound. But there is a strange, lingering paradox that many of us feel but rarely name. Why is it that the more quiet our lives become, the more the mind seems to spiral into a state of high alert? Why does a perfectly silent, modern apartment often feel more draining than a bustling, ancient marketplace would have felt to our ancestors? This is the hidden crisis of the modern sensory landscape. What we call quiet today is not the peace of the ancients. It is a sterile, artificial void that our biological operating system simply wasn't built to handle. We are living through a massive, unrecognized ecological reversal. The very quiet we chase in the name of productivity and wellness is, in many cases, the primary source of our deepest collective anxiety. To understand why this happens, one has to look at the way the human brain processes information. Evolution has turned the mind into a masterful prediction machine. Its main job isn't just to see and hear, but to guess what happens next. In a traditional village setting, there was a constant stream of what scientists call meaningful noise. The steady, predictable sound of a blacksmith's hammer. The rhythmic, distant laughter of children playing. The rustle of domestic animals. To the million-year-old brain, these sounds provided a continuous flow of data. This data acted as a buffer. It occupied the senses just enough to signal that the environment was stable and safe. In contrast, modern silence is informationless. When a person sits in a quiet, soundproofed office, the brain receives no status report. The silence is a blank slate. And because the mind is evolved to assume the worst to keep the body alive, a blank slate is perceived as a potential threat. When the external world goes quiet, the internal alarm system doesn't turn off. It turns the volume up. It starts looking for a threat that isn't there. This is why, in a perfectly quiet room, the sudden, tiny sound of a house settling or a distant car door closing can make the heart rate spike. The brain has been starving for sensory data, and it interprets that one tiny, stray sound as a predator. We have traded the meaningful noise of our history for a meaningless silence. And this isn't just limited to what is heard, it extends to what is seen. Our eyes are calibrated to the complex, irregular patterns of the natural world, patterns known as fractals. A forest or a riverbank is visually noisy, but it is a type of noise that the brain processes with zero effort. It is a texture that anchors us in space. But consider the modern, flat, gray concrete wall or the glass surface of a skyscraper. These are forms of visual silence. They provide no information, no foothold for the gaze. Studies have shown that looking at these sterile, repetitive urban landscapes actually triggers a physical stress response in the body. The nervous system begins to send signals that this environment is dead, that it is unnatural. The result is a hollowed-out feeling, a sense of being disconnected from the very ground we stand on. When the environment stops giving us feedback, the human mind does something dangerous. It turns inward. When there is no external noise to process, the brain begins to obsess over its own internal noise. This is where the modern spiral of overanalysis begins. Without the anchor of a living, breathing soundscape, the mind starts to re-examine a text message from 3 days ago or replay an awkward conversation from years in the past. We worry about abstract futures because we are trapped in a sensory vacuum. Anxiety, in this context, is simply the smoke from a high-performance engine that has no road to drive on. If a person feels exhausted after a day of doing nothing in a quiet room, it isn't because of laziness. It is because the brain has been in a state of high-intensity combat, trying to make sense of a world that is too smooth, too quiet, and too disconnected from its origins. So, how does one find balance in a world that seems designed to starve the senses? The answer isn't necessarily to move to the woods or to seek out more chaos. The solution lies in the pursuit of the right kind of noise. It is worth considering why things like lo-fi beats, white noise machines, or cafe background sounds have become a global phenomenon. People aren't just looking for music, they are looking for a digital simulation of the ancient village. These sounds provide a steady, non-threatening stream of information that allows the internal alarm system to finally stand down. They offer the brain the status report it has been craving. Practical advice for navigating the modern silence is to stop chasing the myth of perfect quiet. Instead, one can focus on integrating meaningful textures back into the day. This could be as simple as choosing to work in a space where there is a distant, muffled hum of activity. It could mean keeping the windows open to hear the wind or the distant movement of life, rather than sealing the self away in a climate-controlled box. If the environment feels too sterile, one can look for the organic errors in the surroundings. Finding the weeds pushing through the cracks in the sidewalk, or watching the irregular way light filters through the leaves of a single street tree. These are vital signals of life that bypass modern logic and speak directly to the ancient nerves. Another effective strategy is to engage in low-information physical tasks. Activities like washing the dishes, pruning a plant, or working with wood. These moments aren't just chores. They are opportunities for the hands and the senses to engage with the irregular, the textured, and the real. In these moments, the mind isn't analyzing an abstract void. It is receiving clear, tactile feedback from the physical world. It is a way of telling the million-year-old brain that the world is alive, that the tribe is nearby, and that it is finally safe to rest. We may not be able to tear down the concrete forests and rebuild the ancient villages overnight, but we can change how we live within these modern spaces. By recognizing that our anxiety isn't a personal flaw, but a survival system looking for a home, we can begin to design lives that actually respect our biology. The future of well-being isn't about more silence, it's about more life. It's about shifting our perspective to see that the bustling, messy, and loud parts of our world are often the very things that keep us sane. We have spent too long trying to silence the world, only to find that the silence was louder than the noise ever was. The world is a much more vibrant and textured place than the gray boxes suggest. We just have to allow ourselves to hear it again. We can find peace not by escaping the noise, but by finding the sounds that tell us we belong.